Arnold Schwarzenegger in True Lies, starring Jamie Lee Curtis.
She did a great job, the way she danced and the way she kind of acted clumsy.
The lights dim, the music swells, and a woman thought to be a quiet, buttoned-up housewife suddenly transforms into someone else entirely. That single scene, filmed in 1994 for a James Cameron blockbuster, would go on to define a career moment so unexpected that even the film's own crew wasn't fully prepared for what they captured. This is the story of Jamie Lee Curtis in True Lies, a film that blended espionage, comedy, and one show-stopping performance that audiences still talk about 3 decades later. By the early 1990s, Jamie Lee Curtis had already built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most versatile actresses, moving from horror films like Halloween to comedies like A Fish Called Wanda. But nothing in her filmography had prepared audiences for her role as Helen Tasker, the seemingly ordinary wife of Arnold Schwarzenegger's secret agent character, Harry Tasker. The premise of True Lies hinged on deception, both from Harry, who hides his double life as an international spy, and from Helen, whose own hidden depths surface once she swept into the world of espionage herself. The scene that has kept audiences talking for decades takes place in a hotel room, where Helen, unaware she's being watched by her own husband posing as a stranger, performs an impromptu seductive dance. It was a bold choice for a film released in the summer of 1994, a movie marketed largely as a big-budget action comedy rather than a showcase for a slow-burn striptease sequence. Curtis, then in her mid-30s, brought a vulnerability and comedic timing to the scene that made it feel less like fan service and more like a genuine character revelation. Helen wasn't just undressing, she was shedding the identity she thought her life required her to wear. What many casual viewers don't realize is how deliberately choreographed the sequence actually was. For years, rumors circulated that Curtis's now famous stumble during the dance, a moment where she loses her footing and tumbles off the edge of the bed, was a complete accident that director James Cameron simply chose to keep in the final cut. It's a charming story, the kind that adds spontaneity to Hollywood mythology. But Curtis herself has since clarified in interviews that the fall was actually planned, a piece of physical comedy inserted deliberately to undercut the seriousness of the seduction and remind audiences that Helen was still fundamentally an everyday woman navigating an extraordinary situation. She has spoken about not wanting to fall more than a couple of times while wearing heels, given the real risk of injuring her ankle on set. When the tumble happens on screen, Schwarzenegger's brief flash of surprise is genuine, and Cameron, recognizing how naturally that authentic reaction played against the choreography, decided not to reshoot it. That instinct, prioritizing raw human reaction over polished perfection, ran throughout the production. Cameron was famously hands-on with nearly every creative element of True Lies, down to rewriting much of the film's comedic dialogue himself after deciding the original screenplay's jokes didn't land the way he wanted. Only a small handful of jokes from the earlier draft survived into the finished movie, including Schwarzenegger's now iconic line-delivered moments. Before launching a missile at a villain strapped to it, Cameron, a filmmaker better known at the time for the tension of Aliens and the technical ambition of Terminator 2: Judgment Day, proved with True Lies that he could write comedy as sharply as he could stage an explosion. Some of that comedy came from unexpectedly personal places. Tom Arnold, cast as Harry's wisecracking partner Albert Gibson, delivered a line about an ex-wife taking even the ice cube trays during a divorce, a joke pulled almost directly from Arnold's own very public split from comedian Roseanne Barr, which was dominating tabloids at the time. Cameron heard the story from Arnold informally and recognized how well it captured Gibson's blend of bitterness and humor, so he wrote it into the film. Casting Arnold at all had been a fight in itself. Executives at 20th Century Fox were reportedly hesitant to hire him given the intense media scrutiny surrounding his divorce, worried it might overshadow the film. Cameron pushed back hard, reportedly threatening to walk away from the project entirely if Arnold wasn't cast, a gamble that paid off once audiences responded to the chemistry between Arnold and Schwarzenegger. Authenticity mattered deeply to Cameron throughout production, and nowhere was that more expensive than in the film's aerial sequences. Rather than relying on visual effects, which were still relatively primitive by today's standards, Cameron arranged to rent real military aircraft, including Marine Harrier jets, from the U.S. government. Flight time alone reportedly cost thousands of dollars per hour for each jet, with the total rental expenses climbing into 6 figures. It was an enormous financial commitment for a handful of shots, but the resulting footage gave True Lies a visceral, grounded quality that computer-generated imagery of the era simply couldn't replicate. That commitment to physical realism came with real danger, and nowhere was that danger more apparent than during a sequence involving Schwarzenegger clinging to the exterior of a taxiing passenger jet. A miscommunication between the stunt team and the pilots reportedly led the aircraft to accelerate to full power while Schwarzenegger was still attached to the fuselage, unaware that the signal to detach hadn't actually been given. The plane surged forward at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour before Schwarzenegger, drawing on quick reflexes built from decades of physically demanding roles, managed to disconnect his safety line and roll clear just before the jet reached takeoff speed. Schwarzenegger later described it as one of the most frightening moments of his entire career, a stark reminder that behind the polished spectacle of the finished film sat genuine, uncontrolled risk. Curtis faced her own moment of physical daring later in the production, one that had nothing to do with dancing. For a sequence requiring her character to dangle from a helicopter high above open water, Curtis reportedly insisted on performing the stunt herself rather than relying on a professional double. When Cameron explained he intended to hang from a helicopter's open door to capture her close-up personally, Curtis reportedly decided that if her director was willing to take that risk, she would too. She trained for weeks beforehand and completed the sequence on her 36th birthday, with the helicopter reportedly reaching speeds near 70 miles per hour as it lifted her into the air. It remains one of the more striking examples of an actor choosing personal risk over convenience in pursuit of authenticity on screen. Not every story from the production carries the same tone of triumph. Years after the film's release, actress Eliza Dushku, who played the Tasker's daughter Donna at just 12 years old during filming, came forward publicly with serious concerns about her experience on set, describing inappropriate behavior from a stunt coordinator that left her feeling deeply uncomfortable, along with a physical injury sustained during a stunt sequence that she attributed to negligence. Her account, shared years later, became part of a broader and necessary conversation within the entertainment industry about the protection of child performers, a conversation that has only grown louder as more former child actors have spoken about their own experiences from that era. It's a sobering counterweight to the film's reputation as a light-hearted, crowd-pleasing blockbuster, and a reminder that the glossy final product audiences see rarely tells the full story of what happened to get it there. The film's legacy carries other complications as well. Its portrayal of Arab characters as villainous terrorists, particularly Art Malik's performance as antagonist Salem Abu Aziz, drew criticism both at the time of release and in the years since, with critics arguing the film leaned on exaggerated stereotypes at a moment when prejudice against Arab communities was already running high following the Gulf War. Malik, who is of Pakistani descent, faced backlash for a role that many felt flattened distinct cultures and identities into a single menacing caricature, a criticism that resurfaces whenever the film is revisited by modern audiences reassessing 1990s action cinema through a more critical lens. Plans for a sequel, which had been actively developed by Cameron and Schwarzenegger for years afterward, were ultimately shelved in the wake of the September 11th attacks, when the idea of a light-hearted action comedy centered on terrorism suddenly felt deeply out of step with the national mood. What might have been another audacious blockbuster instead became a permanently unrealized project, its script quietly shelved as the cultural climate shifted beneath it. Even the film's attempt at a fight sequence tells a story of restraint winning out over spectacle. An early version of the bathroom brawl between Harry and a group of armed attackers was reportedly designed by legendary stunt coordinator Benny Dobbins to be far longer and more elaborate, complete with improvised weapons and an extended, brutal choreography. The filmmakers ultimately scaled it back, worried the intensity would overwhelm audiences rather than thrill them, trading ambition for accessibility in a decision that still shapes how the sequence plays today. What emerges from all of this is a film far more layered than its reputation as a simple summer popcorn movie suggests. Behind Curtis's unforgettable dance, behind Schwarzenegger's tango lessons and near-death experience on a runway, behind the jokes born from real heartbreak and the aircraft rented at extraordinary cost, sits a production defined by genuine risk, creative stubbornness, and moments of real vulnerability, both triumphant and troubling. 3 decades later, True Lies remains a fascinating study of what audiences see on screen versus what actually happened to bring it there, a reminder that even the most polished entertainment often carries a far more complicated human story just beneath its surface.